Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Midland Town Hall Community Engagement event. We're just going to give everybody a couple minutes to get into the Zoom room and get settled and ask any questions. See, we've got lots of people joining right now. If you're having any trouble with the tech, feel free to use that chat tool at the bottom of your screen. And you can post a question and we'll get back to you right away and get you some support with that. We'll just wait 1 or 2 more minutes here and make sure everybody's in the room. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about, of course, the Drumheller Resiliency and Flood Mitigation project, but specifically the Midland berm design. So we're going to open with a land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to go through an overview of the event and the format. I'll introduce our speakers for today, and then we'll move into our presentation. And then we've got lots of time for Q&As at the end for that question and answer period. Tonight at our in-person event, we're going to be doing a little bit more of an open house format where all of our experts and engineers will be around the room and be able to answer your questions one-on-one. And hopefully we'll be able to get more questions answered for you as we move throughout the sessions today. So Robin, if you could advance the slide, we'll move into our land acknowledgement. The town of Drumheller respectfully acknowledges that we are on Treaty 7 territory, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. That includes the Kainai, Bikani, and Siksika, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Métis Nation of Region 3. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those on whose territory we reside. We'll move forward. So we ask again that everybody be considerate of our speakers today. We know there's lots of passionate feelings about this project, and we are going to work really hard to get answers for you on all of your questions. For our virtual event today, right now, feel free to use that chat function to ask your question. I've got my team here helping me to make sure that we see your questions when they come up. So you just pop them in there. And otherwise, we'd ask that you keep your mute button on so we don't get any audio feedback for the speakers. And then again, for this evening, we're going to try a little bit different format. We're going to do more of an open house format after the presentation so that everybody can have their questions answered, have a bit more time with the engineers, and maybe ask more than one question at a time. Okay, we'll advance to our next slide. Our presenters today, I'll just have you wave as I call out your name. So we have Dagan Blakely, our project director from KWL. Thanks, Dagan. We have Irv Gerling, our community advisory committee representative for today. We have Mark Brotherton, our geotechnical engineer. And we have Ernie Webster, our landscape architect from IBI Group. And we have Robert Cheatham from Clone Crippen Berger, and he'll be talking about the Midland berm design today. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so I will introduce Dagan Blakely, our project director, as our first speaker, and we'll advance to the first slide.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yeah, we'll just flip to the next slide, which gives an overview of the project location. So this is a general map that shows the areas where we're going to be targeting berm construction in the coming 4 years. And these are all projects that we have funding for. Today, we're going to be talking about the Midland Dike, which is located towards the upstream end of town. But these project areas all together add up to about 14.5 kilometers of berms that we're planning to construct in the coming years. And it's 340,000 cubic meters of fill that we're going to be aiming to place during that time. So go to the next slide, please. So just wanted to reiterate, there has been some questions coming up about the berm design itself. We are going with a 6-meter top width for the berm, and we're designing to the province of Alberta regulatory flow rate of 1,850 cubic meters per second, plus 0.75 meters of freeboard above that. And then what the basis for that design is, as Mark Brotherton has discussed at a number of past meetings, is it allows us to add additional fill in an emergency event if we need to do that in a hurry. As you may know, there's typically only a couple of days to respond during a flood emergency once we have the forecast and we see the flows start to rise upstream on the Red Deer River. So having this extra space allows vehicles and equipment to safely travel on top of the berm and place additional fill if that's required in the future. As well, the 100-year flood that we're designing to has seen a 30% increase over the last 25 years. So between 1997 and 2021, that target for the 100-year flood has definitely been moving, and it's been going upwards. So we need a resilient design that is looking to the future and something that's going to be expandable into the future. Go to the next slide.
Dagan, I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to make a note. Our chat tool wasn't working there for a moment, but it is up and running now. So if anybody has any concerns, let us know using that tool. Sorry about that, Dagan.
Hey, thanks, Catherine. In terms of the project funding, we currently have a program budget of $55 million. So we have funding dedicated from the Government of Canada Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. We have provincial funding from the Government of Alberta Community Resilience Program, and that accounts for about 50% of our funding. And then the town of Drumheller has dedicated approximately $6.6 million of funding. And as well, I'll let you know that we did submit another application this week through the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund for funding for some additional berms that weren't identified in the original program application back in 2018. So that includes the Riverwood Close berm, the Scarlet and 10X dikes in Rosedale, and the Cambria and Lehigh dikes. So those have been added to the program should we get funding, and it might be several months until we hear back, but that's definitely something the Flood Office has flagged and is considering for future construction as well. So now we'll just go through the schedule where it stands for the program. And so the schedule is outlined here is what we're going to be targeting in the coming years. As I mentioned before, it is a big program with more than 14 kilometers of dikes to be constructed. So we are spreading it out over the next several years in chunks that are manageable to be constructed. And so what we're looking at in the coming year is Dike D, which is in downtown Drumheller. We'll be doing community engagement, that's ongoing right now, a tender early in the new year, and construction starting in the spring. Both the Midland and Newcastle dikes, community engagement will be happening over the next few weeks, looking at doing the tender early in 2022 and then construction through the spring and summer of 2022. Similar for Dike B and Dike C, which protect North Drumheller, looking at community engagement early in the new year, tender in the spring, and construction through the fall of next year. And then Dike A, we've got that divided up into a couple of portions. So there's a Red Deer River portion that will be also targeting doing the landowner discussion, community engagement starting next year, and tender and construction into 2023. We'll move to the next slide. So Dike A along the Michichi Creek, we'll be looking at landowner discussions into 2023, community engagement to follow, and tender and construction in 2024. The Willow Estates berm, we'll be looking at community engagement early in the new year, and then tender through the spring and construction through the fall of that year. Nakamine and Rosedale both will have landowner one-on-one starting in the spring of next year, community engagement to follow through the summer, tender towards the beginning of 2023, and construction to follow in the spring and summer of 2023. And East Cooley will be looking at landowner one-on-ones towards the middle of 2022 with community engagement to follow in 2023 and looking at construction for that one in 2024. I'll hand it back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Dagan. So next, I'm going to be introducing Irv Gerling, our community advisory representative for today. Irv.
Thank you, Catherine. Good day, everyone. I understand there's been some interest of late with regard to the formation of the Community Advisory Committee, including who are the members of the committee and what will they be doing to provide assistance in this flood mitigation process. I have the pleasure of both introducing the committee members as well as providing information that may answer some of those questions. Can I have the first slide, please? The committee members are Kate Samuel, Harvey Saltis, Keith Hodgson, Tony Miglas, and Wayne Powell. I would also like to mention that the committee members will be attending tonight's meeting in person if you wish to meet or speak with us. Our mission statement is fairly straightforward and addresses what we consider to be the overriding concern in the community since the flood mitigation project began. Rightly or wrongly, the perception seemed to be that two-way communication was often problematic. This is where our efforts will be directed. Can I have the next slide, please? In order to help you understand who or what this advisory committee is about, it seemed appropriate to start by letting you know who we are not. We are not elected nor paid a remuneration for our services. We are not self-appointed spokespersons or decision makers. We are not judges, adjudicators, appraisers, engineers, or construction workers. We were not created to erect a barrier, hindrance, or buffer between affected parties. I want to emphasize that last point. None of the members would have been willing to serve on this community advisory committee if we ever thought that that was the reason for its formation. I cannot stress that enough. Could I have the next slide, please? Similarly, we want you to know who we are and what we can bring to this process. We are caring and open-minded volunteers and citizens of this community. We are facilitators whose role is to actively engage all parties in this project, searching for common ground and possible solutions. We are supportive of the flood mitigation program that also addresses the concerns of the people and communities of Drumheller, protects our wildlife and habitat, and fosters economic growth and development. We are committed to a collaborative environment that promotes honest and fruitful discussion. Final slide, please. This last slide essentially addresses our operating procedures, what we plan on doing for you and how, and of course, the reporting requirements is outlined in our frame of reference. To connect with the communities affected by the flood mitigation project. To conduct interviews, investigations, surveys, and meetings as the committee deems appropriate, to ascertain the views of the community, and to share answers and other knowledge about aspects of the project. To submit timely reports of our findings summarizing the views and concerns of the community to the Resiliency and Flood Mitigation Program Office, which will in turn post a summary outline of the report of this committee. I thank you for your attendance here today, and the committee is looking forward to working with you. Thank you, Heather. Now, Catherine.
Thanks, Irv. So our next presenter will be Mark Brotherton, our geotechnical engineer from Parkland Geo. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So today I'm going to be addressing an issue that's come up at several of the open houses and webcasts that we've had regarding the issue of controlling seepage in the riverside areas along the river channel. You could go to the next slide. I'll start by talking about the foundation of the groundwater and surface water regime in this area is based on the fact that we have over the years had precipitation and snow melt that infiltrates down into the ground and establishes a groundwater table. That groundwater table is basically a combination of that infiltration and all of the water that runs off the land and eventually gets into permeable zones where it can be stored. So that's the foundation level of the groundwater that we talk about. And since infiltration is a slow and constant process, the groundwater table in an area is usually fairly static. And it basically, in the Drumheller area, is intercepted by the Red Deer River Valley. So the Red Deer River Valley is deep enough to cause a drain on the groundwater table. And what happens in the valley is that over the years, the valley's filled in with a number of different sediments. They typically start with gravel at the deepest levels and then move up into sands and silts and finally clay materials, because that's the nature of the way the river deposited the materials over the years. And there's an incised channel for the river itself inside these deposits. So what I've drawn here shows you all of the things that combine to provide that groundwater table. The sands and gravels are relatively permeable. They have spaces between all of the particles. And essentially they fill up right across the river valley. And the channel itself, where it intercepts the groundwater table, is the normal groundwater level that you would have outside of precipitation, snow melt, and flood events. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to focus in just on the river channel. So again, you've got water coming up from the bedrock underneath. You've got water infiltrating from snow melt and rainfall that infiltrates down to that water table. And you've got the water that's draining into the valley, both in the terms of runoff and groundwater just flowing down because of the slope of the groundwater table in the slopes themselves. Now, in the Drumheller River Valley, of course, we've got a lot of development in some of the sidebars that we have along the river. Places like Central Drumheller and Newcastle and East Cooley all have houses that are built in there. Some of these houses are manufactured houses which don't have basements, but a great number of the communities that we have along the river have houses with basements in them. Normally, the water table will be present below these houses at a depth that depends on the yard grades relative to those river levels. But the groundwater flows into the river, and normally that water table that you see determines and governs where the river level is. Now, during peak groundwater and flood events, some local developed basements are prone to flooding, and that has nothing to do with the river as much as it has to do with things like the runoff from your roof, the grading around the yard, and potentially the seasonal groundwater fluctuations if they're deep enough. Next slide. So what happens when we have a flood? So in this figure, what I've done is I've shown on the right-hand side a floodplain where the water basically just inundates over the land, and it causes infiltration, and the groundwater table essentially in those areas rises up to where the flood level is in a short period of time. We also have a situation like on the left-hand side where across the valley, there have been dikes that have been placed, and there are dikes that are being proposed by this new program. So over the flood period, which typically lasts 7 to 10 days, and usually peaks at the highest levels about 2 to 3 days in from the start of the flood, you may have a situation where the flood water infiltrates underneath a dike and the groundwater table rises. And if you're in a situation that you have a house close to the dike, the chances of your basement being flooded are going to be determined and governed by a number of different factors. The chances will be determined based on how close the house would be to the dike. What kind of materials are the dikes built on? If the dikes are built on really sandy, gravelly materials, then there's going to be a lot of movement, and the impacts below the dikes are going to be to a considerable distance inside the dike. If the materials that the dikes are built on are clay or bedrock, something like that, then there won't be all that much penetration of water underneath the dikes, and the development in behind the dikes are going to be a lot safer. So again, the biggest impacts occur in sand and gravel subgrades. So we have said this on a number of occasions. The town's flood mitigation program is not designed to protect against this kind of groundwater seepage underneath a dike. And there are areas in the town of Drumheller where there are houses that meet all the criteria of having an unfavorable subgrade, a lack of distance between the dikes and their houses have a tendency to flood during, or to have a seepage issue during a flood. Next slide. So we come and we get asked the question, well, what can you do about seepage? So the typical type of seepage protection option for large areas is to install some kind of a physical cutoff. It could be a clay trench, where in a lot of cases it might be a sheet pile wall through that impermeable zone, or depending on the depth of the impermeable zone, it may just have to be deep enough to cause the water enough problems to get around during the flood event. But the fact is that you need to put some kind of a barrier around. The other thing is that that barrier needs to encircle the entire floodway area, needing protection. So if you look at an area like Nackmine, for example, you would have to basically tie a sheet pile wall in at the highway on the west end of Nackmine, wrap it around along the bank and underneath your dike, and basically tie back in at the east side of Nackmine back into the highway. So the benefit of this type of a cutoff is that during a flood event, it's going to block the water that has a tendency to move under the dike and stop it from having an impact on the groundwater table inside the dike. Now, it should be understood that cutoffs are expensive. I don't think that a clay trench would even be practical here unless it was a very shallow dike or a cutoff trench. And even then, it's going to be adding costs to the dike system that we're trying to build. If we have to go to a sheet pile wall, for Drumheller in most communities, it's going to end up costing somewhere in the range of about $10,000 per lineal meter. So if you look at that in terms of what would a community like Nackmine or Midland need, you'd probably be looking at about a kilometer of dike. And a kilometer of dike at $10,000 a meter is a huge number. You know, it would take basically a large chunk of the money available to the town just to protect one community. Next figure. So here's the problem with that kind of a system. We have seasonal high water table issues in all of the communities along the rivers because we have all this water that's flowing into the river valley, and those gravels in the river valley fill up just like having a bathtub full of gravel. You can fill that water up, and it's just going to keep coming in there. And during the spring, especially when we're in the period of having higher precipitation, in addition to snow melt, the water table in the Drumheller Valley fluctuates. Typical fluctuations in the valley are probably as much as a couple of meters. And you have a situation of that you know, a lot of the house basements that we have are above that 2-meter fluctuation level. And that would be consistent with what we have on the right side of the drawing here. But if we put a barrier to stop water from coming in during these occasional 7-day flood periods, we put a cutoff in there to stop that. That cutoff's also going to block the flow of water trying to drain into the river from the gravel deposits in the base of the valley. And the volume of water that we would be blocking is, quite frankly, massive. So again, the seasonal groundwater flows are going to be greatest during all major rainfall events during the summer and spring. You're going to have snow melt. And since the cutoffs work both ways, you would protect against flood on the occasion, but on a seasonal basis, 3 or 4 times a year, you could have your water backing up in behind the cutoff, and that would cause basement flooding. Next slide. The thing that we have to understand is because all of the water that's flooding into the gravel from the slopes and the uplands and all of the creeks and tributaries that are feeding these gravels, as well as the groundwater that's naturally there all the time, that water backs up across the entire area. So instead of just impacting a couple of basements in unfortunate areas behind the dike from a flood, what we would be doing is impacting just about every deep basement that intercepts the peak groundwater table in every community. So if you look at it, it's a expensive system would be required to maintain water levels below the basements in these communities. So what the practice in Alberta is, the most cost-effective way to provide basement seepage protection is at each house using proper grading along with individual weeping tile systems, drainage mats, water stops, and the like, if you need to have a deep basement in an area that might be prone to high groundwater. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Mark.
On this topic.
I'll introduce our next speaker. It is Robert Cheatham, our professional engineer from Clone Crippen Berger, and Robert and Kurt from his team are working on the Midland berm design. Robert?
Hello, thank you, Catherine, and hello, everyone. I'll just provide an overview of the design of the flood protection through the Midland area. I think I've got control, do I? Okay, so what this slide shows the existing flood defense system through Midland, and there's 3 components. There's an upstream berm that transitions to a central flood wall, and that transitions to a berm that goes downstream to protect the downstream properties in Midland. And ultimately, what the project for the current project is to extend this dike upstream and raise it. And I'll just show you where the design is at the moment. So this slide just provides a summary of a chronology of events. So Kurt and I have been working on this project for about a year, but the design phase kicked off in February, and between February and April 2021, we undertook a feasibility study as well as a geotechnical drilling investigation and lab testing. And that was done in March and April of 2021, with that information feeding into the detailed design, which got underway in May and has been ongoing since May. We're obviously in the public engagement process now, and this meeting is part of that engagement process. And what will happen after public engagement is that we'll undertake the final design and preparation of tender documents, and the final design will take place in the first quarter of next year, and tendering and will take place in the second quarter of next year, and construction would we're currently targeting construction for the summer and fall of 2022. So the this slide here shows the proposed dike alignment, and I'm going to use my cursor. Hopefully everyone can see my cursor, but I'll talk through the oops, sorry, I was just sorry, I'm trying to get back. Can someone go back one slide? Thank you. Okay, thanks. I'll try not to click. So the again, we've got 3 sections of flood defense. We have an upstream dike that starts at North Dinosaur Trail and runs to the west of 25th Street and goes into the railway embankment before turning east and protecting North River Drive. We've located the berm on the upstream end to protect the drainage channel that runs immediately to the west of 25th Street, and it would go over a culvert that drains that channel and discharges into the Red Deer River. And there is a valve at the end of that culvert that prevents backflow from going back upstream. So that's how we would protect the upstream end of Midland. So going west, going east along North River Drive, the berm would taper in around 23rd Street and tie into the existing flood defense system in this area. And what's shown by the black dashed line here is what we've termed a fully adaptive alignment. And basically, we're leaving the current system in place, and what would happen during an event would be that the town would come and place emergency fill material along this. Oh. People can't see my cursor, is that right?
Yes, I'm not sure if we're able to adjust that right now, Crystal, but we'll work on that for our next session for sure if we can't do that right now.
Okay. So I'm at the adaptive fill alignment, which is shown by the black dashed line along North River Drive, and this will in this reach here we will keep the existing flood berm, which is at the western end around 22nd Street, and the flood wall that that's currently protecting Midland. So we would leave that reach as it currently is, and during an emergency, the town would bring in fill material to raise the flood defense to the 1850 cubic meter per second river level plus 0.75 meters of freeboard. So if I keep going towards the east, we can see that the existing flood protection system all the way to 17th Street will be maintained. But then from approximately 17th Street and downstream, we will be increasing the height of the existing flood dike all the way downstream to eventually tie in at the very eastern end to the east of one avenue, First Avenue there in the Marshall Estates. The dike will wrap around the downstream end of First Avenue and tie into the high ground that's at the downstream end there. So that's the alignment of the proposed dike, pretty much following the existing dike alignment. And what's also shown on this figure is the flood extent in the Red Deer River for 2 river discharges. So in the light blue, that's the flood extent for the 1850 cubic meter per second flood. And then shown in the darker blue is the 3,000 cubic meter per second flood extent. And there is a caption at the top of the figure there that just gives the number of properties or homes that are being protected by the proposed flood system. So within the lighter blue shading, there are 190 homes that would be protected by this flood dike system in the 1850 cubic meter per second discharge. So there's 190 homes and 1 multi-unit residential building that would be protected. And in the 3,000 cubic meter per second discharge, the proposed flood system, the flood diking system, would protect an additional 35 homes. So I'll go on to the next slide. So this slide shows the proposed cross section of the dike, and this is a typical section for dikes that are away from the river, or there's a significant amount of room between the dike and the Red Deer River. And what this figure is showing is the existing dike shown in red and the proposed dike shown in blue. And typically we are following the existing dike alignment and incorporating the existing dike into the proposed dike. The figure also shows the water level for the 1850 cubic meter per second flow, and it shows the 0.75 meter freeboard between that 1850 cubic meter per second flow and the top of the dike. So we have a dike top width that is 6 meters wide. We've also sloped the top of the dike towards the river to so that the majority of the runoff from the dike would flow to the river. The slope of the dike on the riverside, we've put it at 2 to 1, but on the land side, the slope of the dike is 2.5 to 1. We're also including a trench that we've called a partial cutoff, and this trench runs along the length of the dike and will be excavated. We'll excavate a trench that's approximately 1.2 meters deep, and we will backfill that trench with low permeability material. And the idea of that trench is for us during construction to be able to see what the ground conditions are like underneath the proposed dike. We do have the geotechnical investigation, but that gives us information at only certain locations. So this will give us an opportunity to see what is underneath the proposed dike. So if there's remnants of conduits, for example, or tree roots or material that was unexpected, then we will know what that is during construction and be able to deal with it. And it also helps with the potential for a piping situation to occur underneath the dike. So we will be partially blocking flows through the silty layer that's underneath the dike typically, and that will help with stopping a piping situation from occurring underneath the dike. I'll show you another cross section. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, so where the existing wall is through Midland, there is a the proposed dike gets quite close to the river's edge, and what we have wanted to do is be able to locate the dike as close to the river's edge that we feel comfortable with. And the way that we've determined that is by working out where the edge of the Red Deer River channel is, and then projecting up at a slope of 2 in the horizontal direction and 1 in the vertical direction, and then that tells us where the toe of the dike would be at that 2-to-1 slope, and the top of the dike would be at that 2-to-1 slope. And in some locations, we've wanted to push the dike as close to the river as possible, and that's the criteria that we've used to do that. Typically, sorry, I'm reading some of the questions that come in as well. Typically, the top of the proposed dike is approximately 1.2 to 1.5 meters higher than the top of the existing dike. So if that's the sort of rule of thumb that can be used to try and work out what the increase in dike height is going to be. I think it's typically about 1.2 meters, but it does vary along the length of the existing dike. And I'll go down to the next slide. Oh, so I think that's me done, and I'll hand back to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Rob. So the next speaker we have to discuss the Midland Vale berm design is Ernie Webster, our landscape architect from IBI Group. Ernie?
Hi, everyone. I'll just leave control there with Kate or Robin and just ask to advance to the next slide. So we'll start with the next slide. And what we started to do just to work with the engineers now that the dike alignment is more set is start to look at creating a landscape master plan for the Midland area. And you can see here we've overlaid the dike into a black and white aerial image. And 2 main components we're starting to look at in more detail. First one is the trail and pathway system through the dike and further beyond, and also the trees. So if we move to the next slide, we'll just high level talk about the trails. The key overriding design principles we're looking at is firstly to keep the trails as they are. We're mindful that there's an existing system, so where we can keep trails aligned as they are currently or in the same location, that is one of the first goals, is to keep trails where they are. So if you just forward through the next slide. One of the other aspects of this is to be mindful of future connections and relating to the town's MDP and land use bylaw and the trail system along the river. So we're trying to be mindful that the trails in Midland connect to future trails and an overall network. So these plans are still high level, but showing where we're proposing schematically to put the trails, which are, by the way, the tan or buff colored lines on the dike. So the dike typically shown here with the trail on top and the dark green being the shoulder or the top of the dike, and the light green being the side slopes and ground disturbed due to the grading of the dike. Next slide. And as we transition in Midland in particular to the east, we're trying to be mindful that we don't want trails going along the top of the dike close to people's homes. And so we're trying to, where we can, deviate the dike system, the path system to the river side of the dike. So you can see here we're taking the pathway, a small gravel trail pathway along the river and away from the ability for people to peer into private property where we can. Next slide. And likewise here, there are some existing trails that are well used, and we're trying to tie in any new trails because of the dike's alignment to those existing trails. Next slide. And then bring this trail on the east side back into the existing trail network. So we're trying to be sensitive to that. These are still schematic designs, and we're working with the engineers on the grading to and from the dike. But it's an important amenity to residents, but it's also important to be respectful of the private property as well. So we're working on that. Next slide. The next component we're looking at in great detail are the trees. We understand and acknowledge they're an important part of the river valley. And where we're at right now is we're about to start a tree development or tree strategy plan. And the first part of that plan is actually to do a really detailed assessment of what's there right now. And Rangeland and Sally's on the call here today, and they have done a really excellent assessment and great detail of every single tree that's in the line of the alignment of the dike. Next slide. We've started to break out species, percentage of the different types of trees. Next slide. And importantly, the health and condition of each tree. The typical rating for each tree is either very good, good, fair, poor, very poor, or just the stump condition. Next slide. And so what we've done is we've taken that data from Rangeland and started to input this into the landscape plan so we can get a picture of what we're exactly losing. In some cases, it's not bad because some of them are poor, and in other cases, they're good. The red, orange trees, next slide, we're not too bad on that west side, but you can see as we move around the corner onto North River Drive, the trees that are impacted, and in the legend, red trees being trees that are already very poor, going to green, that are in good condition. So there's quite a wide range. We have a really good inventory and picture through these plans. Next slide. Of what the tree removals are going to look like. And before we can implement a tree strategy, we really have to have a really good handle on this and what the impact is. Next slide. And so we're just concluding that part of the assignment. Rangeland have provided the data and they'll be able to speak to real specifics. We are aware of tree removal, the Wildlife Act and bird nesting and making sure the window for removals is adhered to through all the policies that are in place. So Rangeland can speak to that in more detail, but in the high level and in the big picture, we are doing a really good analysis of what's there. And in terms of what we're going to put back, we're working on that now. We're being mindful of diversity in species when we put new trees back into the area. They cannot be in the exact locations where they come out because the dike is an engineered structure and we can't go planting trees right into the dike. Otherwise, we compromise the safety and the engineering principles or the design of the dike. So we are looking at a strategy that puts new trees back into the same community, but it won't be in the exact locations where they're coming out. And that will be our next step now that we've got this inventory. we'll be looking at opportunities where we can put back new trees. We're also mindful of carbon sequestration and looking into the strategy aligning with that. And like I said, diversity of species. And also there's opportunities perhaps in the removed lumber being recycled and reused in landscape and in the community. There's lots of potential opportunities, but we haven't gone too far with that yet. We've this is the status, if you like, where we are. I think that was the last slide, maybe one more, which just shows the removals at that east end. And we're just starting to work now through the engagement and with the engineers on the plan ahead for tree replacements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. So Robin, we'll just go to that next slide. So as always, this is the email account to get to myself. And if you have any questions after this event, you're welcome to email us there. And then our website's floodreadiness.drumheller.ca. It is live, and we're actually just migrating it over to the town site in the next few days as well. So you'll see that updated to the town site quite soon, but this link will get you there as well. So we're going to move into our questions. We've had quite a few questions come in online in advance of this session, but we'll open the floor to questions right now to our attendees. We have one question already. I'll direct it to you, Robert. Elaine is looking to know where that dike elevation is occurring. Is it at 25th Street, the roadside, or the riverside? Elaine, let me know if I'm not saying that correctly. Robert, do you have an idea of that? Oh, you're just on mute there.
Thanks. So if the question means the top of the dike elevation, maybe it's clearest if I go back to the cross section. Could we go back
Robin,
up?
yeah. So Robin, thank you.
So the maximum elevation is would be on the road side of the dike as opposed to the riverside. So we have a 2% slope going from the crest on the road side of the dike towards the river, and that crest would be about 1.2 meters higher than the existing structure.
Thanks, Robert. Our next question is, what elevation is the existing barrier wall? Robert, would that be for you, or maybe Mark Brotherton?
The existing wall is about 1.2 meters high, I'm thinking, maybe a little bit higher, and that would be the approximate height of the wall along there. Maybe it's about 1.2 to 1.5 meters high.
Great, thank you. While we wait for more questions to come in, we'll go to our first online question, which is...
Catherine, it's Daryl. Sorry,
Hi,
I just
Daryl.
wanted to jump in to add a piece to Robert. I think what Elaine's question was which side was the berm being built on 25th Street? And so I think what that cross section that shows that we're all along Midland, we're building on the river side of the existing berm. So I just want to confirm, is that correct, Robert?
Sorry, could you say what you were saying again?
That the new berm is built between the existing berm and the river and not on top of the roadway.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Elaine, does that clarify that for you, or would you like me to just see what's, what side, as I was told by Daryl a bit ago, proposal was made for the dike to be built on the river side?
Which is what I just asked that question.
Okay,
as well, so.
okay. Let us know, Elaine, if you want more clarity to that. Our next question is, what is the geodetic? Let me see if I'm saying that correctly. Elevation of the top of the concrete barrier wall.
That I would have to, I'd have to look that up and
Okay.
provide that information. I'll make a note
And
of that.
I have your contact information, so Robert can get that information for me. And then I can get that to you in the next couple of days or so. I think, Elaine, we've got that clarity for you now, and let us know if you'd like to discuss that more. We'll go to slide 48 as we wait to hear. The question that came in online is, as the current berms in Drumheller do not meet the design flood elevation of 1850 meters per second, cubic meters per second, plus the 0.75 meter freeboard, if someone intends to take out a development permit, do they have to build the main floor to 1850 cubic meters per second, plus a 0.75 meter freeboard? Daryl, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. So for those watching, of course, the answer is up there, but the land use bylaw says that the main floor elevation must be built to the flood construction level, which is the 1850 cubic meters per second flow level. So it does not include 0.75 freeboard. Unlike the old land use bylaw, which did include a 0.75 freeboard elevation on top of the 1640. So we're probably pretty close in terms of the elevations between the old land use bylaw and the current land use bylaw with respect to 1850. So.
Thanks, Daryl. Someone just asked, why can we not see all the questions as they're presented? So the reason is that the people that asked the question selected host and panelists. If you select everyone, then everyone can see the question. And if you just select host and panelists, then only the hosts, myself, and the panelists can see it. So that's the difference there. Mark, I see your hand is up. Do you want to add something to that?
No, just going back to the top of the wall. I just looked the plans up from the as-built that were done in 2009. And the top of the wall elevation is 684.67 at the middle.
Okay. We're just hearing that the panelists or the attendees are having trouble selecting to everyone. Robin, I think it looks like she fixed that. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. So you should be able to select, ask your question to everyone in order to get that question seen by everyone. Robin, can you advance to slide 49, our next question? So this question came in online again. When the town runs out of dollars building to 1850 cubic meters per second, plus 0.75 meter freeboard, and there are remaining berms yet to construct, how will the town be protected from possible high water events? Would it not make more sense to build to a design flood elevation of 1640 cubic meters per second, plus 0.75 meter freeboard to protect more areas of Drumheller? Dagan, do you want to answer this one?
Sure, yeah. I guess as it states there, we're not expecting that we're going to run out of money for the berms that we've selected to build under the program at present. And it is the provincial government that has told us that the 1850 meters cube per second is the appropriate design flow. And so that's what we've selected for the program. If the town were to use a lower flow rate for design, it is likely to impact their eligibility for disaster recovery program funding into the future and potentially other forms of funding as well. So the town really wants to meet the minimum standards set by the province for the design elevation on our berms in this program.
Thanks, Dagan. Robin, do you want to advance to our next slide, slide 50? Again, this is a question that came in online, and we use the wording as it arrives to us. So the question is, an explanation is required on the protected flood fringe area, and when does the town intend to address this concept in the town's land use bylaw so that realtors and property owners have knowledge of future regulations? Daryl, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. So the protected flood fringe areas are the areas that will be protected by berms that are built to a permanent level, so the 1850 plus freeboard level. And they're currently shown in the land use bylaw on the flood hazard overlay maps. So it shows where the future berms are expected to be constructed to the proper level and what's being protected by that. They're not considered protected until we actually have constructed the berms. So that is just a bit of, and we said with our bylaw change earlier this fall that this is one of the areas that we're considering that people need to include. They need to also look at the provincial flood maps as well. So once the work has been started and as over the next few years, the province will be updating the flood maps and we'll be updating our land use bylaws. But of course, we're not in the finished state of any of these yet, so it's premature for us to start doing this work. And really part of what we're doing with consultation is getting a lot of the people that are involved along the river knowing about the changes that are coming in, and so that's part of our information to them.
Thank you, Daryl. We've got 2 questions that have come in online. So someone is asking when and how can we get a list of these questions and answers as in a hard copy? These are now all on the website under the FAQ. So feel free to go and take a look there. There's another comment here, and it looks like more of a comment than a question. This person lives at 1506 North River Drive. Since building here, I've seen the dike raised 3 times. Now all the trees in front of my house will be cut down and I get to look at a weed-infested dirt wall for an unneeded dike. It has never been and never will be 2000 CPS. I think they're referring to cubic meters per second. Go stop the logging at the headwaters and control the dam in the river. So Robin, I'd like to be able to post this comment so everybody can see it. But then maybe Dagan, would you like to answer the how that cubic meter per second flow rate has gone up over the years and that it's why we're predicting that need for that increased amount?
Yeah, and maybe if it's possible, I will share my screen and show a graph of what the past flows on the Red Deer River have been. So we have actually seen flows above 2,000 cubic meters. It was decades and decades ago, but it is something that has occurred in the past. So I'll just share with you guys what that looks like. So this is a bar graph that was produced by Northwest Hydraulic Consultants when they were doing the flood study for the province. And as you can see, there has been one flood event in the past that was in that range. And this series of information that we're looking at was what was used by the province in their study to determine what an appropriate flood flow rate is. So the gray area or the gray bar charts are floods that have happened in the past prior to construction of Dixon Dam. And then the red and blue lines are showing what the peak flows are each year, with the red being what the flow that was observed in Drumheller was. And then with the blue on top is what it would have been if Dixon Dam was not in place. So you can see there was also fairly high flows in 2005 and 2013 that were cut back by the presence of Dixon Dam. So as we get more data available to us, that's what's increasing our estimate of the 100-year flow. So you really have to take in consideration the whole period that we have records for when we're picking a design flood and determining what's appropriate for the town.
Thanks, Dagan. In the interest of transparency, I've copied and pasted that person's comment into the Q&A section so others can see it. We'll go to slide 51, or the next question. When do you intend to write letters advising those property owners that they are now located in the floodway? Daryl, would you like to answer this one, or Dagan?
Sure, I can take that, Catherine. So I think that for the most part, as it states there, those flood hazard maps were originally, or last major update was in 2007. So
oh, Daryl, you just went on mute all of a sudden there.
Oh, is that better? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So the provincial flood hazard mapping was published in 2007. So anyone that has purchased property or moved should have known that. It's actually a right to disclose that if you're a seller or a realtor for that property. So the plan is that there will be no new areas designated as floodway. So we're not going to advise anyone new or about anyone about floodways that don't already know about it. I think, again, there's lots of information out there on the flood mapping. One of the pieces that's really important to recognize is that Drumheller isn't the one that's necessarily setting the flood zones. Or I guess that's provincial. We've been trying to tell people that for quite some time, as we've been told that. And so if people are looking for that information, really they should be checking with the provincial flood maps. And the link is on the site here on the screen for people to look at.
Thanks, Daryl. Slide 52, please. When will the town address the residents' concerns regarding devaluation of property assessment, insurance, and renewal of mortgages for those properties now in the floodway and for those properties that will not be protected by a berm because the town will run out of dollars? Will the town allow structures to be rebuilt in the floodway as they were originally built, as stated in the exemption letter from the province dated June 1st, 2017? So Daryl, I'm going to direct this to you because it refers to our land use bylaw.
Sure. So I think there's a few questions here. So I think that one of the pieces that, again, that we have talked about, and Dagan just mentioned it, is the requirement that the province has said that sort of the one and done with respect to disaster funding. So by not constructing berms or not constructing to the proper elevation, we actually run a greater risk of the community having properties devalued if there's no protection for them. So by having berms constructed in place to the proper elevation, it will actually make insurance and mortgages probably easier to get than in the past because there will be a more favorable view by the lenders and insurers on those properties. So I think the exemption letter is very interesting because the province has, since that time, the province has changed, the government has changed, and the letter from the minister in June of 2021 supersedes anything that states that for any of our flows before. The part that is also interesting is that, so again, the land use bylaw says we can construct back in the floodway. So if you have an existing house or a building in the floodway area, you can, and it's damaged due to flooding or fire or something like that, you can construct it as long as you're not making it larger or below the flood elevation. So if you're building an addition onto it, it has to be constructed above the flood elevation that's in the bylaw, or you are not, and we're not allowing anything larger on a ground surface area. So I think that those are really clearly laid out in the land use bylaw.
Thank you, Daryl. We just had another comment that came up around the flood in the 40s. So I've just retyped that so everybody can see it. Did you want to also address that question around the devaluation of property and that this work may increase values?
Sure. I thought I said that at the beginning. I think that one
Sorry,
of the
maybe I missed that.
No, it's okay. I think that, yeah, one of the parts of, if you know that your property is insurable, if you know that it's protected and protected to elevation that's governed by the province, that should in fact increase the value of your property as opposed to decrease the value. I think the properties that aren't protected, that you have, especially if you have the one and done, and if you've claimed that already with disaster funding, that would completely devalue the property because there's risk by whoever is a property owner there that nothing would be repaired in the future without their own costs. So I think that protected structures in every municipality that I've ever seen increase in value relative to unprotected structures. It really goes, it's no different than providing fire protection to a community. If you can provide fire protection to homes, you tend to increase the value of it relative to no fire protection.
Thank you, Daryl. Slide 53. When will the town address the conflicting information in the municipal development plan with regards to building berms to 1640 cubic meters per second plus 0.75 meter freeboard and 1850 cubic meters per second plus 0.75 meter freeboard? Daryl, do you want to address this because it's the municipal development plan?
Sure. So I think as the statement says there, so I think original version of the MDP and LUB had 1640, and we've talked enough about the fact that the province partway through that process came down and told us 1850 was the number that we will be using. So the final versions of those documents should have 1850 in both the municipal development plan and in the land use bylaw. And the link to it's there, and I think if there's anything in there that says 1640, that's just a typographical error that would need to get changed. But to my knowledge, it all says 1850 in there. So.
Thank you, Daryl. Slide 54. So Mark, this one's for you. Where is the berm material coming from if hill dirt is not being used? Is it true the town is using bedrock to construct the berms as conveyed by the previous flood mitigation officer, Mark Steffler?
Thank you, Karen. The fact is that we're in the process of trying to find suitable borrow sites in the valley and above the valley and in close proximity to the town. The use of bedrock material is not really a preferred material. We're mostly looking at the depositional material, colluvium at the bottom of the hills and some of the valleys around the hills, and the material, the glacial and lacustrine materials at the top of the hills that are non-bedrock. As I said, the bedrock materials aren't ideal. There are some bedrock materials that can be adequately broken down and used, but the majority of the materials in the valley are high plastic and dispersive, which is not conducive to berm construction.
Thanks, Mark. A question has just come in, and this might be for Robert or Mark. For the adaptive barrier on the cement wall, the amount of fill, will it amount to 0.8 meters?
I can take that. So what would happen in an emergency would be that we would place adaptive fill on the road behind, on the land side of the wall, and we would build that adaptive fill up to the full height, and it would be approximately 1.2 meters. The top of the adaptive fill would be about 1.2 meters above the top of the existing wall.
Thanks, Robert. Slide 55, please. When the berms are built in various neighborhoods, is it the town's intention to have a drainage ditch between the properties and berms so that there is a system in place for heavy rains and protection of the houses? Dagan, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, for sure. So as our teams are moving through the detailed design phase, drainage is an important consideration in the design. So definitely the berm designs will include provisions for overland conveyance of drainage, whether it's a ditch or other structure at the inside toe of the berms or the dikes. So in some areas they may not be required, but in most areas they will be, and that will be included within the design.
Thank you, Dagan. Mark, another question's come in for you asking to clarify again on the preferred material. So the question is, Mark, does that mean that the preferred material is clay, or is it gravel, sand, or riprap? Can you please clarify?
The preferred material would be a clay or a sand with a high percentage of clay in it.
Great, thank you. Slide 56, please. When the berms are being constructed and heavy compaction is carried out, who will be covering the damages to house foundations and cracked wallboard that may occur? Dagan, would you like this one?
Yeah, sure. I can just comment generally that we're including information in the contract documents that require that the contractors undertake the work in a manner that mitigates impacts to any buildings or homes adjacent where the work is occurring. And maybe I'll turn it over to Mark Brotherton because he can provide some specifics for items that the town or the contractor may undertake to help mitigate these issues.
Sure, Dagan. This is a common problem what we have in municipalities across Western Canada where we're doing upgrading work beside existing residences. So there's a fairly defined practice of doing vibration monitoring as a part of a contract. We either have the contractor undertake that work, or we have an allowance for the contractor to allow the town to provide a vibration monitoring when we are doing work in close proximity to houses. And it's a preventative thing as well as a documentary thing. Basically, if we get vibrations that are too heavy, we know that they have a potential to cause damage, and we can ask the contractor to modify his work program to get below the thresholds that we would normally see. We would also probably be looking at some kind of a documentation process for houses in close proximity to construction areas, so that we can document prior and post-construction conditions for structures, and that's as a way to mitigate potential disputes.
Thank you. Slide 57, please. Before I read that one, there's a follow-up question to that, Mark. The question's not answered. Who's covering any damage that does occur?
Typically, if there's damage that's done, it's determined whether the contractor was at fault, or if the contractor was following his contract, then usually the municipality is the one that would step forward. But again, it has to be proven that the damage is due to the construction, which is that's why the pre and post condition surveys are important. It's not uncommon to find when those types of things happen that the town can get hit with a whole bunch of claims for stuff that probably didn't relate to the construction, but it's an opportunity for a person with damage in its house to try and get somebody else to pay for it. So we need to be fair about this, and a program has to be set up for pre and post condition along with vibration monitoring during the construction.
Thanks, Mark. Our next question is, sorry, we just got a follow-up question. So is it standard to survey every potential home that may be impacted pre and post there, Mark?
To be honest, my recommendation would be yes.
Okay.
And I know that there are several communities that do this on a regular basis. Regional municipality of Wood Buffalo is one that springs to mind. They're probably the leader in Alberta for doing this. And it's a very effective mechanism for having this issue dealt with between the municipality and residents.
Thank you. The next question is, in the past, mine shafts that run under the river and throughout the Drumheller Valley have been inundated by flood and storm water. What is being done to protect residential properties from underground flooding? Dagan, would you like to take that one?
For sure. So I think Mark addressed earlier through his presentation what the process was for groundwater and how the flood program was not going to be targeting mitigating groundwater flooding to basements during flood events. We are looking at protecting against overland flooding as one of our main scopes. But mine shafts are definitely not something that we're looking at through the current flood program.
Thank you. We had a follow-up question, Mark Brotherton, regarding that pre and post survey work to every home that's going to be around the construction zone. This person's asking, why haven't they been contacted? That's probably because the construction hasn't been tendered. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Slide 58, please. Are you proposing to abandon one of the Newcastle ball diamonds for construction of a berm in this area? Robert, would you like to address this one, because you're going to be presenting on Newcastle on December 1st?
Yep. So no, we're not planning to abandon any of the Newcastle ball diamonds for berm construction.
Thank you. Slide 59, please. Why did the town purchase flood properties when they're now being rented out? Dagan, would you like to address this one?
Yeah, sure. So the recent property buyouts that were completed were for properties where the buyer had approached, or sorry, the property owner had approached the flood office regarding a sale. And so we did take advantage of that opportunity when it was offered to us. We do have a big program. We have a lot of landowners to work with over the next few years. So we need to do things in a spread out fashion. So we're not just purchasing all the properties that we need, 1 month before construction. We definitely have to spread it out over the time frame. And we are renting out some of those properties to offset some of the monthly maintenance costs. And then the buildings are planned for removal in spring 2022. So those are just short-term rentals to help cover some of the costs.
Thank you, Dagan. Slide 60, please. What measures are in place for protection of the green belt, in particular the natural native poplar trees? Ernie, would you like to address this one?
Hi, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the tree strategy plan is now in progress, and we are looking at ways to protect trees where we can, but as you would have seen from the diagrams, it's going to be hard to achieve complete protection, maybe for some significant trees around the edges of the dike, but generally the idea is then to have a future strategy which will include a 5-to-1 ratio of tree replacements, which will include the native species and species that are local and indigenous and relevant to the Drumheller River Valley. So that's kind of a work in progress at the moment, but we're aware we're going to protect where we can.
Thanks, Ernie. Slide 62, please. So this one has been addressed. And so this is, oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I got ahead of myself. Robin, you can go back to slide 61. Sorry about that. It has most recently been stated that the tendering process for berms will commence in January of 2022. Will this time frame inflate the prices for potential bidding, as there could potentially be 2 to 3 feet of snow on the ground? How will contractors view the job in its natural state? Dagan, would you like to address this?
Yeah, for sure. So it's quite common to tender work over the winter months, and that allows the contractors time to plan their work and get ready to mobilize for the spring. So downtown Dike D is going to be tendered in the winter months, but as mentioned earlier, the Newcastle and Midland dikes, we are going to be tendering in spring. So the contractors will be out looking at the site, ideally not in a snow-covered condition for those ones. And that the contractors really are experienced with this, so it's not an issue, and we don't expect that it would change the bid prices at all.
Thanks, Dagan. Next slide, please, 62. This is the one that we've already addressed with Irv, but so the question is, who are the members of the Flood Mitigation Community Advisory Committee, and what have they accomplished to date? So Robin, would you mind sliding back to, and I'll just put up the names here of our advisory committee. It is slide 14. The Flood Mitigation Committee has completed their training on the flood project. Just go back to slide 14 when you have a chance there. There it is. They have created their mission statement. They've completed that training, which was quite a few hours of flood mitigation information. This is the committee members are listed here. Their mission has been selected, as well as their function and objectives going forward. So they can be reached as well, and I'll grab that email address for you shortly here. And Irv is here to answer any questions as well if you have them for us. So we'll leave that up for a couple more seconds, and then we can go back to slide 63 with our contact information.
Catherine,
Yes.
I could just mention that we started about the middle of October. We've had, I think, around 7 sessions of training, somewhere in the vicinity of 11 hours when you look at the preparation and time spent there. And then additionally, from that point, depending upon the committee member, we've probably put in anywhere from 6 to 12 hours of group work and background study and review. So it's been a considerable amount of time already, but we're enjoying it.
Thank you, Irv. And I'll have the contact information follow up with everyone here. I'll send that out. I don't have it at my fingertips. I apologize. That's my fault. I'll get that email address and put it in the follow-up slide and on social media as well today. We have a follow-up question. If damages do occur, if a flood occurs during construction, who's responsible for the damages, the contractors or the municipality? Dagan or Daryl maybe would be the right one to answer this question.
Yeah, maybe I can take a stab at it and then let Daryl follow up. I guess it would just depend on what the situation was there. So if the contractor has started work and they've done something where the existing dike is lowered, that would obviously be an issue for the adjacent homeowners. So we will have provisions in the contracts to make sure that that doesn't occur during the flood season. But if the dike is intact and the flood occurs and overtops the dike, then it's no different than a situation where construction was not occurring. And it would be, the homeowner would actually be looking to the province for disaster recovery funding for damages in that case. Daryl, if you want to add to that.
I think one of the other pieces to add in there is that if we have contractors that are actually working on some of these berms, that we actually have equipment right there. We're already using dirt. So if we happen to be notified of a flood going to impact the community, we're probably in a lot better opportunity to be able to help work to create the adaptive berms as needed throughout those areas that are being impacted by construction. So I think that is probably a bit of a lucky, that'd probably be a bit of a lucky piece in there, but nevertheless, I think what you've said, Dagan, is exactly right.
So if you have any other questions, please feel free to put them into the chat tool. And we'll hold on for a few minutes while we wait in case something does come up. So this recording will go on to the website today, and it will be on the new website as well once it's migrated over. And someone's asking how many attendees. We have 35. There were 36, but attendees on this afternoon. And I believe we have 45 registered for this evening. So this recording will go on that website. So you'll be able to ask all these questions. Any of the questions that came in advance also have gone into the FAQs. Another question's come in. How many years down the road is the 5-to-1 tree replacement planned? Ernie, would you like to address that?
Well, the next step will be to cost out how much based on the strategy which we're working on is going to cost, and then see how that aligns with town budgets and the dike construction budget. So it's not determined at the moment, but the first step will be to get a handle on what the cost is for the replacements, and that's a work in progress at the moment. And just a note on that, we're also looking at, in terms of numbers for replacements, whether we're going with fair condition trees through to very good, but not necessarily dead or poor condition trees. So that's very much a work in progress, but it's a good question.
I can add to that as well. I think we would typically look at including the landscaping program, which would include tree planting together with the construction of the the dike contract. So as the work is completed and wrapped up for the dike, then the contractors would go back in and be completing the associated planting. If there are plantings that are occurring in, say, park areas some distance from the dike, then that might be given out as a separate contract for the overall program. But yeah, that will yet to be determined, but we will be targeting to have it working in step together with the dike construction.
Dagan, when do you plan on that happening?
The dike construction?
No, sorry, the
Right.
tree replacement strategy being implemented.
So I guess people maybe are not familiar with the urban forest strategy. So we do have a document that the Flood Office has prepared, and we will be making that public over the coming weeks. But again, we will be looking at replacing trees that are removed just immediately following the construction of the berms as a target.
Elaine, hopefully that answers your question there. Are there any other questions that our audience would like to ask the engineers? Robin, if you can just put up the final slide with the email address on, that would be great. We've got that flood committee, the advisory committee address for you. I'm just going to put it into the chat so that you can access this group whenever you like. It's floodcommittee@drumheller.ca. I've just checked our social media, the DRM flood info email, and there have been no new questions that have come up through that location either. Elaine was just saying that she doesn't agree with or support the approach for this evening's meeting. All questions are pertinent to all people. And on one-on-one talks, which can be different, are dangerous and not accountable. So I think what we're trying to do is make more people available to ask more questions to more experts all at the same time. It can be intimidating for people to ask a question in front of a large audience. So this makes it much more interactive. That's why we've provided this virtual event where people can ask questions publicly. This event is recorded, it's shared online, and all the questions have gone to the FAQ. If you have any questions that you'd like shared publicly, please send them to me. We can always address them on social media, and I can always put them on the FAQs. I think it's more intimidating for the presenter. Elaine follows up. Sometimes it is intimidating, if I'm honest, but that's why we do it both ways. We're doing it at the virtual session where you can ask your questions publicly. And we're offering in person in that more interactive way where you can ask multiple questions one-on-one. We have another question that's come in. When you start removing trees, is it your intention to hire a qualified arborist for the project as opposed to the Riverside catastrophe? I'm not sure what the Riverside catastrophe is, but Dagan, do you want to talk about who would be qualified to remove trees?
So yeah, I'll mention before we do tree removals, we would make sure that we are either outside of the migratory bird nesting period, or we would also have a qualified specialist come out and have a look at the trees and make sure that there are no active nests in the area. And then we would work with our contractor that's hired on each site, and they would be responsible for removing the trees that are in the berm footprint prior to construction. I don't know if, Sally, if you'd like to add anything about that.
No, I don't really have much to add to that one.
I can maybe throw a comment in there. I think that Dagan, you said something that was very important. Good afternoon, I'm John Boyle. I own Rangeland Environmental out of Airdrie. If working within a migratory bird period to ensure compliance of the Wildlife Act, Migratory Birds Convention Act, and the Species at Risk legislation, Drumheller will engage a company like Rangeland to go out and within 7 to 10 days, do a wildlife sweep to determine if there's any bird species that may be nesting. Regarding the question about having an arborist on site, well, Ernie's already, I think, addressed that quite nicely, and the work that Rangeland did with the tree program, the health assessment, probably wouldn't be necessary at that point to actually have an on-site arborist during construction. Hope that helped.
Thank you, John. Any other questions that are coming through? They're asking about trees that need to be simply pruned or removed. Would that need to be an arborist?
So if there are any trees that need to be trimmed back for during construction, is that what the question is?
Yeah, they're just following up. We're talking about the trees that simply need to be pruned or removed. I think they're asking, does that need to be an arborist?
That one, I guess that's a little bit outside of my area of expertise, so I would have to get back to you on that. But my understanding is that the town have staff on board that are qualified to do that, and they do undertake that work throughout the year. So I will check on
Pruning
that.
wouldn't be a part of the flood office's scope. Would that be correct?
There may be some trees that we do need to trim just for truck access and things like that to avoid damage. So,
okay.
Yeah, I can't say at this time who would do that, if it would be a qualified arborist or if the contractor can undertake that work.
I would just add that as part of the conditions of the contract and the specifications in the contract documents, we would refer to any tree removals that are done to the proper specifications. So that will be included in contract documents, and experts such as Rangeland will input into those specifications along with the town of Drumheller's experts.
Thanks, Ernie. So Elaine's just reiterating that she's not in support of the approach to the meeting tonight and the format for the meeting. Thanks, Elaine. So if anybody'd like to read that, it's posted for everyone to see. Are there any other questions that the audience would like to ask us? The footprint is 50 to 80 feet wide. There won't be a tree along North River Drive. So I think this person's referring to the policy that we can't have trees in the berm. Dagan, would you like to address that? It's really a comment.
Yeah, and I guess it is unfortunate that we do need to take some trees down to implement the flood mitigation program, but we feel that really the risk to the community of not doing it is significant. And the town has decided that we are going to undertake a flood mitigation program at this time, and there will be some impacts. We're going to do our best to mitigate that by replacing trees elsewhere in the community as best that we can. But yeah, you're right, there are going to be a number of trees removed.
Thanks. So there's another question regarding removal of trees. So I'm going to rely on Ernie and John and Sally here. Are you going to have a waiver for removing elm trees or pruning regarding Dutch elm disease?
My comment is general, but any trees that are in the way of the dike, or regardless of their species, like I said, if there's a way, if they're on the edge, we can look at trying to protect where possible. We're cognizant that there are some nice trees, but at the end of the day, as you said, Tegan, it will be unavoidable in some circumstances. And that is in the process of being reviewed in more detail.
Thanks, Ernie.
And I'll just add to you, Catherine, that our contract documents do have provisions for managing trees that either have Dutch elm disease or black knot. So we have noted that both of those are present in the community, and there are provisions for the contractor to deal with materials.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Dagan. Thanks, Ernie. Are there any other questions that we can address? I'll just stay on a few more moments in case there are more questions. So I'm just going to have that flood committee email address popped back in the chat for anybody who'd like to speak to the advisory committee. So Elaine, I know you're not happy with the format for the event tonight. If you'd like to talk to the community advisory committee about that, because I know we've spoken about it before. The email address is now on the slide. Thanks, Robin, for adding that in. I've put it into the chat tool. And so you're welcome to speak to them about it too. We've got another question that's come in regarding those trees. It's a provincial regulation to not cut elm trees from the spring to the fall unless properly disposed of. So I guess it's more of a comment, not a question. Any other thoughts the team would like to add to that? Oh, so Daryl just clarified she's referring to the time that elm trees cannot be removed during the year. There is a no trim time from spring until fall. I didn't know that. Thank you.
And again, I'll just reiterate our contract documents do have provisions requiring the contractor to comply with provincial regulations for removal of any diseased trees that they encounter on site.
Thank you. So we've got our email address up as well as our website. We'll stay on for a couple more minutes just to make sure that if anybody has any other questions, we're here to answer them. As I said before, this full recording will go online. It'll be shared publicly in multiple locations all through the social media assets, as well as the website. All of the questions that were submitted in advance will go into the FAQ portion of the website. You're welcome to go back and look at those and take a look. You're also welcome to email us at any time to discuss these questions or concerns, and I always do my best to get as much information for you as possible. Thanks for attending, Crystal. Thank you for our mayor and council for attending, the council members that were able to attend today. I know they're at a conference, so I appreciate you attending virtually. So it looks like there aren't any more questions that are coming, but if you do have a question that comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at drmfloodinfo@drmprogram.com. And we will see those of you who are registered for this evening. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you tonight. Please remember that you do need to be masked and show your vaccine record or a negative COVID test that has been performed in the last 72 hours in order to gain entrance into the BCF. So please have that information ready for you and your mask, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for attending, everyone, and thank you to our panelists for answering those questions, and we'll see you all soon. Have a good afternoon, everybody.